In the summer of 1993, a woman vanished without a trace just days after spending Christmas with her family in Warrawong, New South Wales, in Australia. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in turmoil and sparked a police investigation that would go cold for nearly 3 decades. Pauline Lawrence was born in 1944. She would later come to be known by her married name, Pauline Lawrence. At the age of 49, she was living in the Wollongong region, specifically in the suburb of Warrawong, located in the southern part of New South Wales, Australia. Pauline was a devoted mother of 3 children. She also had a creative side that found its outlet in crafting and sewing. Pauline enjoyed working with her hands, especially when it came to altering clothes for herself and her children. In the early 1990s, Pauline's life began to shift. She was going through a divorce, a difficult and emotional period that concluded with a financial settlement. But just as she was beginning to reshape her life after divorce, her simple, modest existence was about to be cut short, forever altering the lives of those who loved her. In 1993, around the Christmas season, Pauline was spending time with her family. It was meant to be a time of togetherness and celebration, but concern quickly set in when her loved ones realized she was nowhere to be found. Her sudden and unexplained absence raised alarm, and after failing to locate her or hear from her, her family reported her missing to the police. What began as a hopeful search soon turned into a long and agonizing wait for answers. The police officers initiated an investigation into Pauline's disappearance shortly after the missing person report was filed. They conducted interviews, searched local areas, and followed up on any leads that came their way. Despite their efforts, no clear signs of Pauline's whereabouts were uncovered. The trail appeared to grow cold early, and the lack of concrete evidence made the case difficult to pursue with urgency or direction. As the months turned into years, the investigation continued, though with limited progress. In 2008, 15 years after her disappearance, the police officers reached a grim conclusion. Based on an unverified sighting reported in 1993, shortly after she went missing, they determined that Pauline had most likely passed away around the time of her disappearance. This assessment, while not supported by definitive evidence, marked a turning point in the case. With no further leads and no new information, the investigation was effectively suspended. The declaration that Pauline had likely passed away did not bring comfort to her family. Without confirmation, a body, or an explanation, the official conclusion felt like a cruel guess rather than a truth they could come to terms with. In 2022, nearly 3 decades after Pauline's disappearance, the investigators reopened her case under a renewed effort named Strike Force Anthea. With fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques, the authorities began re-examining old evidence and pursuing new leads. Their work led to multiple searches in bushland areas, where items of clothing were uncovered. These discoveries were considered potentially linked to Pauline, raising hope that answers might finally be within reach. The breakthrough in the cold case came on May 29, 2025, when New South Wales police arrested a 64-year-old man named Leon Boyan at an apartment in Gwenville. His connection to Pauline's disappearance had not been previously established, but new information brought him into the spotlight. The investigators had learned that Pauline had come into some money in mid-1994, a detail that appeared to have sparked a serious dispute. It was during this period that events reportedly took a fatal turn. According to police findings, Pauline was allegedly abducted from her unit on Grey Street in Woonona. The authorities believed that her life was later ended in bushland surrounding the suburb of Fig Tree. Although extensive searches have been conducted in the area, her body has still not been recovered. The clothing items discovered in the bushland remain under forensic examination as the investigators work to confirm whether they belonged to Pauline. Boyan faces 2 serious charges: accessory after the fact and concealing a serious indictable offense. On May 30th, he was brought before the Wollongong local court. The magistrate denied him bail, with the police arguing that he could not be trusted to avoid interfering with witnesses during the ongoing investigation. The case is scheduled to return to court for mention on July 30th. In a statement, the police acknowledged the emotional toll this long-running mystery has taken, saying, "To this date, we still have not located the body of Pauline, which is quite unfortunate." Pauline's son, Jason Lawrence, said, "We have waited more than 30 years. We welcome today's news that a person has been arrested in relation to the suspicious disappearance of our beloved mum." He added, "We miss her every day, and her disappearance has taken a huge toll on myself and our entire family. We thank the police officers for never giving up hope, and we look forward to the outcome of this investigation." In August 2003, the police conducted a welfare check in Milford, New Hampshire, and made a horrifying discovery of a decomposing body. Suspicions were raised close to home, but the brutal crime would remain unsolved for over 2 decades. Paul Herlihy was born on November 16, 1952. He was a Massachusetts native who made a living as an antiques dealer. At one point, Paul had been married, but the relationship ended in divorce. Despite the separation, he remained a devoted father to his teenage son Douglas, who he loved deeply. However, Paul's relationship with Douglas was strained and increasingly troubled. Douglas had begun to struggle with issues that went beyond typical teenage rebellion. In Massachusetts, he had become entangled with negative influences and was facing legal trouble. These difficulties weighed heavily on Paul, who desperately wanted to protect his son from further harm. Believing a change of environment could help, Paul made the decision to leave Massachusetts behind in hopes of giving Douglas a fresh start. During the winter of 2003, Paul relocated to 425 Nashua Street in Milford, New Hampshire. His plan was twofold: to open an antiques shop in half of the house and to distance Douglas from the people and circumstances that had led him astray. Despite his best intentions, Paul could not fully escape the shadows that followed Douglas from their past. On August 27, 2003, a police officer arrived at Paul's residence to perform a welfare check. What was expected to be a routine visit quickly turned into a scene of horror. Inside the home, the officers discovered Paul's body in an advanced state of decomposition. The unsettling condition of the remains immediately raised concerns, and law enforcement quickly launched a full-scale investigation to determine what had happened to him. An autopsy was conducted shortly after the discovery, revealing that Paul had lost his life as a result of blunt force trauma. The medical examiner ruled that his life was ended, but despite the thorough examination, the specific weapon used in the attack was never publicly disclosed. The investigators estimated that Paul's life had been ended sometime between August 23rd and August 27th. The timeline left only a narrow window to piece together the final days of his life. They combed through Paul's personal life, searching for motives, questioning anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual, and looking into his recent interactions. The authorities reached out to neighbors, friends, and anyone familiar with Paul or his son Douglas, hoping to learn more. The police had reportedly responded multiple times to domestic incidents at the Milford residence prior to Paul's demise. While these calls suggested a volatile household environment, Douglas was not considered a suspect in the case. Complicating matters, just hours after Paul's body was discovered, Douglas, who was 17 at the time, was arrested in Massachusetts. He had been caught driving his father's 1995 Lincoln without permission and was also charged with substance possession. However, despite the arrest and the troubled history with his father, Douglas was explicitly not considered a suspect. Despite their efforts, leads were scarce, and the investigation faced increasing difficulties as time passed. As the weeks turned into months and no solid suspects or motives emerged, the case gradually began to lose momentum, and eventually, the case went cold. 6 years later, in 2009, the case was officially added to the New Hampshire Department of Justice's Cold Case Unit, where it remained largely inactive for years. In mid-2025, more than 2 decades after Paul's demise, the investigators decided to take another look at the case. The review was spearheaded by the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit, in conjunction with the State Police Major Crime Unit. This renewed examination brought fresh attention to old evidence and introduced modern forensic techniques to reevaluate the crime scene. As a result, key findings emerged from a newly released probable cause affidavit that had not been fully explored before. According to the affidavit, one critical detail stood out. Only Paul and Douglas were present in the house when Paul lost his life. Paul's last known contact with anyone was a phone call on August 23, 2003, shortly after 8 p.m. This timeline, along with the discovery of his body wrapped under a tarp and carpet in the home, narrowed the scope of the investigation significantly. Evidence from the scene began to align with suspicions that had once seemed inconclusive. Further forensic testing was conducted on a carpet padding stained with blood, which had been pushed out of Douglas's bedroom window. The results showed that Paul could not be excluded as the source of the blood, while Douglas was definitively excluded. Though this evidence did not offer a complete picture of what happened that night, it raised new questions about the events leading to Paul's demise and why his body had been hidden. The case, once ice cold, was moving again under the weight of renewed scrutiny and long-buried facts. On June 17, 2025, after more than 2 decades of uncertainty, 39-year-old Douglas was arrested by Massachusetts State Police in Saugus, Massachusetts. The arrest was made on a warrant charging him as a fugitive from justice in connection to the 2003 cold case of his father, Paul. A detective involved in the investigation commented on the arrest, explaining the delay in bringing charges. According to the detective, the long gap in progress may have been due to a lack of sufficient evidence at the time. He also noted the possibility that a critical eyewitness or close contact had remained silent for years and only recently came forward. That new information, the detective said, was vital to building the case and ultimately making the arrest. Douglas faces second-degree charges in New Hampshire. Following his arrest, Douglas was held without bail while awaiting his arraignment in Essex County Superior Court in Massachusetts. Legal procedures were quickly initiated to extradite him to New Hampshire, where he would face formal charges and stand trial for the crime that had remained unsolved for over 21 years. In October 1997, skeletal remains hidden in the woods near Wilkes, Washington were stumbled upon. Despite clues, her identity remained a mystery for nearly 30 years. In October 1997, a mushroom picker walking through the woods in Wilkes made a grim discovery. As he moved through the dense forest terrain of Pierce County, he came across skeletal remains partially hidden from view. The location, a remote area along Gale Creek Road, lay approximately 9 miles from Wilkes School and just south of Buckley. Startled by the find, the mushroom picker quickly alerted the local authorities. The police arrived promptly at the scene and began a detailed examination of the site. The skeletal remains appeared to have been deliberately concealed. The body had been placed in a shallow depression and carefully covered with logs, a clear indication that someone had tried to hide it, suggesting foul play. The circumstances immediately turned the discovery into a criminal investigation. As the forensic teams processed the scene, they collected the clothing and items found with the remains. The victim had been wearing a dark blue long-sleeved sweatshirt featuring the Pacific Lutheran University logo alongside a basketball graphic and the word Lutz. She also had on size 7 Union Bay blue jeans and white Reebok tennis shoes trimmed in yellow and green, marked as size 4.5. These details provided the investigators with some clues, but no concrete identity. A preliminary analysis of the bones suggested that the victim was a female, approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, and likely between the ages of 20 and 50. Despite these findings, the woman's identity remained elusive. No missing persons reports seemed to match the description, and the clothing did not lead to any direct leads. With little forensic technology available at the time to advance the case further, investigators faced a frustrating end. The remains were carefully stored, and the case was kept open, though it quietly drifted into obscurity over time. The cold case took a significant turn almost 12 years later, in August 2009, when the details of the unidentified woman, known only as the Pierce County Jane Doe, were officially entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Though the case had remained stagnant for over a decade, this step ensured her story would not be forgotten. It also meant that if any future technological advancements occurred, her case could be revisited with new tools and perspectives. In 2023, 14 years later, renewed efforts to identify the woman finally brought a long-awaited breakthrough in April 2025. Evidence preserved from the remains was submitted to Othram. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing and genealogical analysis, the scientists were able to match the unidentified DNA to living relatives. After decades of uncertainty, the investigators were able to put a name to the remains: Laurie K. Krage. Laurie was born on December 17, 1959. In 1982, she married Thomas Krage. Their marriage lasted for 6 years before they divorced in 1988. The reasons behind their separation remain private, as neither shared publicly about their relationship or its end. Laurie found love again and married her second husband, Ronald Martin, in March 1995. They resided in Pierce County, Washington, where they remained for years. Laurie had been married to Ronald at the time of her disappearance. He had passed away from natural causes in 2020, closing one potential avenue for direct questioning. Despite the identification, new questions quickly emerged. Most notably, the unsettling fact that Laurie had never been reported missing. For the investigators, this detail stood out as both puzzling and deeply troubling. The detectives reopened the case, determined to uncover the truth behind Laurie's demise. Units issued public appeals for information, specifically asking anyone who had known Laurie or her late husband between 1995 and 1997 to come forward. They hoped that someone, no matter how distant the memory or seemingly small the detail, might hold a piece of the puzzle that could lead to justice. As the investigation gained traction, one detective remarked on the complexity of the renewed inquiry, saying, "We are literally starting from the ground up on now opening up an investigation that is 30 years old." The statement reflected the enormity of the task ahead and the dedication of those involved in finally solving the case. The passage of time had eroded many leads, but the investigators remained committed to pursuing every possible angle. Laurie has living family members, and the detectives have been in contact with them in hopes of solving the case and bringing closure to the family. After so many years without answers, the identification offered a starting point, but not an end. Anyone with information about Laurie is asked to submit a tip to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office via their Android app or iPhone app. Tips can also be submitted anonymously through Crime Stoppers by visiting tpcrimestoppers.com or calling 1-800-222-TIPS. In August 1986, partial skeletal human remains were discovered in Herlihy, Georgia. Without an identity, the case went cold for nearly 40 years. On August 9, 1986, a group of hunters made a grim discovery in a wooded area roughly 5 miles southwest of Herlihy in Gilmer County, Georgia. The location, situated just off the Appalachian Highway, was remote and quiet, far removed from the daily activity of town life. As the hunters moved through the underbrush, they stumbled upon partially skeletal human remains scattered across the forest floor. Horrified by the scene, they immediately contacted the local authorities. The police arrived swiftly at the location, securing the area to preserve any potential evidence. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, with bones exposed and disarticulated, indicating that the body had been in the woods for a significant amount of time. The scene was disturbing and raised immediate concerns of foul play. The police began documenting and collecting evidence, but the condition of the remains made identification and investigation particularly challenging. A medical examiner was brought in to perform a thorough autopsy on the remains. Following the examination, it was officially ruled that his life was ended. There were no clear signs pointing to the victim's identity, but the nature of the skeletal damage suggested deliberate harm. The confirmation added urgency to the case, and investigators intensified their efforts to determine who the victim was and what had led to this tragic end. They consulted missing persons reports, reached out to surrounding jurisdictions, and examined any potential links to crimes in the region. Every avenue was explored, from dental records to possible witness accounts, but each path seemed to reach an end. Despite their efforts, no solid identification could be made. Eventually, the case was filed as cold, the remains still unidentified, and the person responsible for the crime unknown. In February 2024, nearly 4 decades after the discovery of the remains, new life was breathed into the investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation Cold Case Unit partnered with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and Othram. Their goal was to apply advanced DNA technology to the unidentified remains found in Gilmer County in 1986. With cutting-edge techniques, they aimed to do what had been impossible at the time of the original investigation. Othram scientists utilized forensic-grade genome sequencing on the severely degraded skeletal remains. This process, which allows for detailed genetic analysis even from compromised samples, enabled the creation of a genealogical profile. Once built, the profile was entered into genealogical databases in hopes of identifying living relatives. The effort led to a nationwide search for potential familial connections. Eventually, the break came through KIN-SNP rapid relationship testing, a method used to confirm genetic links between individuals. The results pointed directly to David Clary. At the time of his demise, he had been in his late 20s, aligning with the age estimation made during the initial autopsy. His last known location before his disappearance had been in Gwinnett County, Georgia. In February 2025, his family was formally notified. After years of uncertainty, they finally learned what had happened to their loved one. David Clary was born in 1957. He spent most of his life in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was there that he grew up and built the foundation of his adult life. At the age of 29, he had already begun to establish a routine centered around his work, which required frequent travel. His professional duties often took him through metro Atlanta and into various parts of North Georgia, a region he had become very familiar with. This constant travel was part of the hustle David had embraced. With David being identified, the emotional weight of the news brought both sorrow and a measure of closure, even as it opened the door to new questions about his demise. The case has been reclassified and remains open and active. The investigators are working to retrace David's final movements, hoping to uncover crucial leads that could point to a suspect or motive. No suspects have been publicly named, and the motive behind the slaying remains unknown. The authorities continue to urge anyone with information to come forward. Anyone with information is asked to contact the GBI Regional Investigative Office in Cleveland at 706-348-4866. Anonymous tips can also be submitted to the GBI by contacting the GBI tip line at 1-800-597-TIPS, 8477. In 1972, a 16-year-old left his Kansas City, Kansas home and never returned. A missing persons report was filed, but a breakthrough in the case would only come decades later. On April 18, 1973, a grim discovery was made 3 miles southeast of Garnett, Kansas, off 1550 Road. The decomposing remains of an unidentified male were found in a remote area. The location and condition of the body suggested that the person had been lifeless for some time. It was a significant development, but without clear identification, the discovery raised more questions than answers. The unidentified man was found wearing a brown corduroy jacket, a green, long-sleeved button shirt, jeans, and a black leather belt with a large buckle. His clothing also included brown hiking boots and a navy blue stocking cap. Several pieces of jewelry were found on the body, including 2 gold rings engraved with crosses, a ring with the number 78, and a silver chain with a large cross. These personal items were noted in detail, in hopes that someone might recognize them and help identify the victim. An autopsy was conducted, and the coroner officially ruled that the man's life was ended due to visible signs of trauma. Based on forensic analysis, it was determined that the victim was likely around 20 years old, with brown hair and a slender build. Despite the clues from the autopsy and the victim's clothing, the authorities were unable to establish his identity at the time. Throughout the years, law enforcement made numerous efforts to identify the remains and learn more about what happened to the young man. the investigators examined missing persons reports from across the state and beyond, hoping for a match. Forensic sketches and reconstructions were attempted, and appeals to the public were made, yet no solid connection was found that could put a name to the victim or explain the circumstances of his demise. As time passed and leads ran dry, the investigation slowly lost momentum and went cold. In 2024, more than 5 decades after the remains was discovered, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation made a renewed effort to identify the remains discovered in 1973. With the advancement of forensic technology, samples from the unidentified individual were submitted to Othram. This effort was made possible through funding provided by the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. By early 2025, a breakthrough emerged. Testing conducted by Othram had led to the identification of genetic relatives of the unknown man. This discovery marked a major step forward in a case that had remained unsolved for more than 5 decades. The results provided investigators with new hope and a clearer path toward finally learning the identity of the victim. Acting on the information uncovered through forensic genealogy, agents from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office began locating potential family members. Their search led them to the siblings of the unidentified man. After conducting interviews and obtaining a DNA sample from one of the siblings, the authorities submitted the sample for comparison. The DNA analysis confirmed what had long been unknown. The remains belonged to Jimmy Allen Dollison. After more than 50 years of uncertainty, Jimmy was no longer unidentified. Jimmy was born in 1956. In 1972, 16-year-old Jimmy was living with his family in Kansas City, Kansas. The Dollison household was a tight-knit one, and Jimmy was surrounded by people who cared for him deeply. Concern quickly turned into fear when Jimmy failed to return home. His parents, alarmed by his absence and knowing this was out of character, filed a missing person report. The authorities took the matter seriously and launched an investigation to locate the missing teen. The police officers began searching tirelessly, canvassing neighborhoods, speaking with locals, and following up on any leads that could shed light on Jimmy's whereabouts. His family, who had lived with unanswered questions for decades, finally received confirmation of what had happened to their beloved son and brother. With Jimmy's identity confirmed, the case shifted focus. Local investigators and the Anderson County Sheriff's Office intensified efforts to uncover the circumstances surrounding his demise. The case, long treated as a mystery without a name, now had a face, a family, and a history. The investigators began working to trace Jimmy's final movements and identify the people he was last seen with. The authorities are revisiting old records, interviewing individuals who may have known Jimmy in the early 1970s, and seeking new information that could finally reveal who was responsible for taking his life. The authorities urge anyone with information about the case to contact the KBI at 1-800-KS-CRIME.